We prepared this interview in talks with our friends and colleagues. They read your book and we discussed it and asked them what would your questions be to tell to Mr. Caputo. We will use these pictures for our lectures, parts of it, and we'll do an article, not with the whole interview. I will condense, sum it up, and send you the text so that you can see what we will publish. And it would be fine if you could speak in simple words for ordinary people of our parish, for example, but not too simple. Yes.
And not too long also.
Yeah, to speak on the point, that would be nice.
Well, then you must not hesitate to interrupt me, because
Okay.
my tendency is to speak too long.
Okay. So we'll start with the theme. Some of the themes we discussed in the last days, but we decided to leave it in the interview so that we have the chance to publish.
Sure.
Yeah. The first theme is, well, war in Ukraine. It's really worrying and preoccupying people in Germany. In Europe, war has really come close now. What would be your considerations or points of view starting from radical theology?
I was ready to answer until you said radical theology.
Yeah.
Because my views on this are largely pragmatic, political. I mean, the theological background is always the maximization of peace and nonviolence, and therefore conversation. And the difficulty here is a conversation is impossible with, I think, and now I'm simply speaking as an American citizen, it seems to me a conversation is impossible with Putin, and his aims are nationalistic and ideological, and he is without mercy and without shame, and he treats human life as dispensable, and he's willing to sacrifice tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of lives of his own soldiers, his own people, and the mercenaries that he hires. And he attacks civilian objects. He doesn't attack military installations, or he does, but he doesn't only attack military installations. He attacks people. He attacks mothers and fathers and children. He's attempting to destroy that country. And so he strikes me as an utterly ruthless person with whom no conversation is possible, who only understands force, and who is willing to last it out. You know, I think the great danger is that he's willing to, as long as he's in power, to sacrifice as many lives and kill as many people as is necessary, because he doesn't really care about killing people. And consequently, the only thing the Ukrainian people can do is do what they're doing, which is remarkable, valiant, courageous people, to resist. And they can never sit down to the table in a conversation unless they have leverage and can speak from a relative position of power. And so I see a permanent stalemate. I mean, someone once compared it to the First World War in the trenches, and they would fight and fight and fight over a few yards of ground, and then fight and fight and fight, lose the ground, gain the ground, lose the ground, gain the ground, and it went on and on. And I see something like that in Ukraine, but I see no alternative other than to resist. And that does not come from radical theology, that just comes from realpolitik. And it's my opinion. I'm not an expert, I'm not a political scientist.
Perhaps the next sentence is more theological, philosophical. One sentence in your book, a quite essential sentence, is God doesn't exist, he or she insists. And, mankind is deaf, overhearing the call. We ruin the world. We are doing far too little to combat climate change. The weak God created weak people. Do you have a hopeful or optimistic thought which could help to bear this?
Yes, that's a very good question. Eine gute Frage. When I speak of the weakness of God, I am not advocating the weakness of human beings. The weakness of God is a call to strength on the part of the human response to God's call. So I am not against strength. I want the good to have strength and power. But I want to demystify the idea of God as a being who is going to intervene for us if we pray hard enough and if we make sacrifices. He'll eventually and I say he now on purpose, because I think this is a patriarchal, masculine conception of God as an omnipotent being who is going to protect us, who will intervene on our behalf. So just so long as we pray hard enough. That, I think, is believing in magic. I think it's a mystification. It is a personification of what I like to call what is going on in the name of God. The event. You translated event as ereignis, did you not? Yeah. The ereignis. Rather than saying that God, the name of God is the name of somebody, I think it's the name of a roof, of a call to us to respond, to stand up for the weak and the oppressed, to stand up for justice. And it's our responsibility. So I would say we must become part of the history of God. The name of God is a call. Human history is the response to that call. And we must make ourselves part of the history of God. We must make the kingdom. We pray for the kingdom to come. We must make the kingdom to come. Walter Benjamin has an idea, a Jewish philosopher, theologian, literary writer, has a very wonderful idea of the Messiah. He says, you go for the Messiah, you want the Messiah to come, you must know we are the Messianic people. We are the ones the dead have been waiting for. We are. We must step forward. We must respond on behalf of the widow, the orphan, and the stranger. God is not going to get all the plastic bottles out of the ocean. We have to do that. But the name of God is the name of the weak power, because it's God's not somebody who's going to do this. It's the name of a, we could say, to speak more non-philosophically, it's the name of a moral imperative. Mm-hmm. Put it that way, moral imperative. A little bit like Kant, du sollst. It's a imperative. Mm-hmm. It's an imaginative, I think, this is the heresy, so this is that there are maybe some people should cup their ears at what I say next. God is, the name of God is a imaginative construction, in a focus imaginarius of everything we hope for, and believe in, and love, and cherish, everything in the end supremum. You know, that's, you said that's so höchste Wesen, and it's a personification. So it's the way if you have a tree that you have taken care of all your life, or a plant, when no one is around, you may talk to that tree. You say, "How are you this morning?" Wie geht's? And that's a personification, but it's very real. It's not real in the sense that there's somebody there who's going to talk back to you, but it's a way of making genuine contact with a natural object, a part of creation. And I think that prayer and talking to God, thinking of God as somebody, very valuable, very important, indispensable. I don't think you can get away from it. I don't think there's any way to avoid it. But I do think it's a personification. And so it is not something that is going to do something for you. So when I say God insists, I mean God calls. God is the name of everything. It converges into one. Everything we hope for and love and cherish.
Okay, I step in now with my question, which is very close to what you told us. It's about the weak God once again. For we feel also in our work in the parish that sometimes it's really hard for people to give up believing in this strong God, this high mighty God who sets things right. And this is especially when you're confronted with people who have a really hard time, who are really suffering. For example, this question was given to us by a colleague who is working in a psychiatric hospital, and he asked us, ask him, what can I say to these people who are suffering? Are there words for them like, not even high and mighty, but like there's a God, perhaps a more motherly God who holds you and will give you strength to endure all what you have to face. What would you say about this?
I have two answers. One is, I once, when I was a young philosopher teacher, told my mother that the rosary, which Catholics hold here, was a devotion created in the Middle Ages, I think by the Franciscans. And it was not something that the Blessed Virgin Mary came up with and passed on to Catholic people. And she was utterly appalled at that. And she was she was uneducated. She only went through 5 or 6 years of elementary school, and she was not sophisticated, educated, and she was just appalled. And I realized from that day on, I will never say anything like that again to her, because I don't want to disturb her very meaningful life, which included all what I consider to be works of creative imagination. The whole of Catholic doctrine and the stories and the narratives in the New Testament, all of it. We had holy pictures all around the house. I decided I am not going to disturb that. I am not going to touch it. I'm just going to let it be, because it made for in her life, in my father's life, gave it meaning and sense. And so I would say, if the person you're talking to is not interested, or if the person in the hospital is someone like that, then I think that the symbolism that is contained in saying that God loves you and is watching over you should not be disturbed.
Okay.
As the world moves on, there are fewer and fewer people like that. There are more and more people who say, walk on water, wine and water into wine. What's that? What's going on there? And to people who have the level of education and culture, who need to answers to these questions, then I think we should answer them. Now,
Okay.
I have a young man. This is right on your question. I met a young man. I gave a talk somewhere, and this fellow came up to me afterwards, and he said, "I am a hospice, work in a hospice as a chaplain. Dying people, the only thing you can do now is amelioration, alleviate the alleviation of pain and make them comfortable." And he said, "I can no longer." He said he once found himself talking to someone who was hooked up to a feeding tube.
Of course.
And he was telling this person about the heavenly banquet. And this is a person who couldn't eat anymore. And he said he said that night he went home and he said he couldn't live with himself. He said, "I cannot repeat that again. I cannot talk like that anymore." He said, I don't believe that, and I can't repeat it to this man. So I said, "Well, what do you do?" And he said, "Take their hand. And sometimes I say nothing. I hold their hand. Sometimes we talk. They remember the old days, and we talk. And sometimes we say nothing." And he said, that companionship, that being with one another, is what's going on in the name of God. That's what it is. That's what's really, that's the Ereignis. The story, it's a beautiful story, but that's what it means.
Okay.
Now, if you're talking to someone who can understand what you're saying, that I think is the way you would deal with a situation like that. It's one of the reasons I wanted to be a philosophy professor and not a doctor, or a pastor, because I didn't want to have to be in that situation. I mean, that is as difficult a thing as. Now, I worked with some nurses who were. I wrote a book called Hermeneutics, just facts and interpretation in the age of information. And one of the chapters is on nurses who are pediatric oncologists. They work with child cancer. And they speak of what they call difficult conversations. Difficult conversations. And that's your question, is difficult conversation. Yeah. And sometimes it's the best difficult conversation. Just hold their hand.
Then there's also the point, I think it was also in your book, that many people think if people suffer so much, and sometimes also because the other people did that to them, there must be something like compensation, something like there is a place where they are well, a bit like the story of Lazarus and the rich man, and if there is justice, there must be something like that. We hear the voice and the mourning of the oppressed, of the suffering, and one day there should be recompense. There should be a recompense. What do you think about that?
Why? Where is it written that there will be justice? Yeah, I don't think that justice I think that justice is what we love and desire, and it is incumbent upon you, me, and everyone to make it real, make it happen. But I don't think I don't think we can think about life itself in terms of an economy of investments and returns. And if somehow you're shortchanged in this life, there'll be recompense in the next life. I think that turns life into a commercial exchange.
Mm.
And I don't think life is a commercial. I think life is a gift. And sometimes de-gift is de-gift. It's poison. And, so there's a difference between happiness and joy. Happiness, we don't have any control over.
Mm.
If you're born poor or disabled, or you suffer a terrible accident, or you lose your luggage on a trip to America, that's beyond your control. That's happenstance. That's geschehen. That's what happens. And you can't control that.
What about Easter, the center of Christian belief? How can you think resurrection without a high and mighty God?
Well, I mean, I think all of the central images in Christianity and what became doctrines are symbols of something important and valuable. But I think they're symbols. I don't think that you can literalize them in the same way that when you go to the theater and you go to a performance of, now I'm going to use English examples, Macbeth or Hamlet, and there are ghosts up there, and Hamlet or Macbeth is speaking with these ghosts. Mm-hmm. You don't just say, this is ridiculous. There's no such thing as a ghost. I'm going to go find another thing and then go find another show where there are no ghosts. We believe in these ghosts. We suspend our disbelief in order to believe poetically in these ghosts, because these ghosts are telling us something. Instead of saying something very important, there are no ghosts. Ghosts insist they don't exist. And I think that on a more serious level, the symbols of Christianity or any religious tradition are symbols that are saying something. And what the symbol of resurrection is saying for me is life is always too short. Life is always, we are never ready to die. To reconcile yourself with death, I don't know what that means. We want more life. And Easter is a symbol of coming back from the dead, coming back from the darkest abyss of our lives and finding the light again. It's a symbol of never giving up. It's a symbol of hope. It's interesting that for the German idealists, for Hegel and Schelling, who thought like this, they thought in those terms. Hegel in particular said that what we're talking about here is eine Vorstellung, in the sense of an imaginative presentation of something. Now Hegel thought there was a Begriff that would explain it all. And Schelling said, nein. So there's no Begriff, kein Begriff. What we have is Vorstellungen all the way down. There's no deeper explanation. But anyway, Schelling and Hegel both thought these are profoundly important imaginative formations which come deep from our bowels. They're not just fancy that we've made up, not just arbitrary, fanciful ideas. These are forged from experience, from what Winston Churchill called the blood, sweat, and tears of our life. So We didn't arbitrarily make these things up. And so you can't prove them with a logical argument. And if people ever stopped believing in them, you couldn't save them with a logical argument. You can't refute them, and you can't prove them with a logical argument. Why? Because they're not logical arguments. These are deeply embedded, imaginative formations in which we're speaking about what it is we truly believe in and think and love. And Easter is that. Now, what's interesting is about the German idealists is they said Easter is not the highest moment in Christian experience. Pentecost Sunday is. Why? Because it's then that Jesus says, now it's your problem. Now I leave you my spirit. It's up to you. That's the summit of Christian doctrine. And in Dostoevsky, in the famous Grand Inquisitor, one of the things I enjoyed about that was the Lord Cardinal was enraged that Jesus would come back. He said to him, "You're not supposed to come back. We're in charge now. We have power over life and death, not you. You're in heaven, and you left us in charge." He was enraged at that, right? And then Jesus listens to all that. Well, you know this. This is in the book, and he says, "Here's them all out." And just goes, "Okay, this is a kiss."
In one of our lectures about your book, one participant asked, "What does Professor Caputo say about creation? If God is weak, he can't be the creator of the world, can he?"
Not if you think about God in terms of cause and effect. So if you're interested in a causal explanation of the origin of the universe, I would not recommend that you consult 5th century before Christ Mesopotamian mythology. I don't think that will give you the best causal explanation of the origin of the universe. If you really care about the origin of the universe, you need to learn a great deal about mathematics and physics. And they have a reasonably interesting explanation. And that's this galaxies upon galaxies upon galaxies, trillions of galaxies, all of the matter in the universe came from a dot smaller than the head of a pin. All of the matter of the universe was there. You said, well, where did that come from? Well, St. Augustine said all creation goes back to God who created it. And then Augustine says, well, suppose we ask where that came from. Where did God come from? What was God doing before he created the world? Augustine says, there was no before or after. Time is a result of creation. So if you ask a physicist, where did the Big Bang from? What happened before the Big Bang? He said, there was no before and after the Big Bang. The Big Bang is the beginning of time. It's the beginning of before and after. And that's where it all came from. And where is it going? Well, if we knew that, we would get a Nobel Prize. But the current thinking is it's spreading into oblivion. So, if what you want is causality, if you want an explanation, if you want an Eine Erklärung, the way the Wilhelm Dilthey put it was, Eine Erklärung is a causal explanation. Then you need to study mathematics. But Dilthey said, well, that's causality. But he says, if you read literature, if you read history, or if we talk to one another about life and death, then we're not looking for eine Erklärung, we're looking for verstehen. We want to understand what is going on. The name of God is not the name of a first cause, a causa prima. it's a name that belongs to the discourse of understanding. What's going on in our lives? What's this about? Yeah. And then one of the ways we, in the Abrahamic traditions, not everybody talks like this. If you were born in the 18th century in Hawaii, and you were a native Hawaiian, you would be talking about lava rock, not God. This is Abrahamic talk. God, in the singular, capital letters. That's Abrahamic talk. If you were born somewhere else, you just might not think like that at all. You might think in completely different terms. But the question of verstehen, of understanding what our lives are about, life and death, joy and happiness, justice and injustice, all there, with a different causal account of things. So God is not, I don't think of God as a prime mover unmoved, which is what Aristotle called him, and which Thomas Aquinas picked up. That's what made Luther so angry. Luther was close to the scriptures he's reading, the New Testament. There's no prime mover unmoved in here. There's no substance in accidents. There's none of that. There's no natural law. The very opposite of natural law. Natural law is paganism. It came from the Stoics. In the sign of God in the New Testament, there's all these crazy things that happen. Water becomes wine, and the weak are made strong, and the first are life. Crazy things happen in the New Testament. So God is not a causal explanation of things. God belongs to our heart. And our heart is not. It's not arbitrary fancy. Our heart is the way we are tuned to the world. The Bestimmung. Heidegger likes to play with Bestimmung. It's the way we're tuned to things. Our attunement to the world. And so you listen to your heart. And when I say creative imagination, that's a combination of these unconscious and preconscious things, along with consciousness, working together. So it's not arbitrary fancy. God is a profoundly, incomprehensibly deep symbol. And if you know what a symbol is, you'll never say, only a symbol.
Okay, good. That's really good in the context, because my next question is about spirituality.
Fidelity?
Spirituality.
Oh, spirituality.
Yes. All prayers, biblical stories have words for God as someone, as a person to whom I address my prayer, a you to whom I reply. Or is your talk of God at the end of metaphysics?
Well, this is what we were saying before about the importance of personification.
Mm-hmm.
Personification is a valuable, important. You speak to your dog, right? Of course. You speak to your plants. You speak to an old family keepsake, and you look at this old hat, this old pipe, and you say, oh, and it brings tears to your eyes because you remember, oh, my grandfather, or my father, or my old Uncle Harry. And you talk to it. And I think that's what happens in prayer. Paul Tillich, who became famous as an American theologian, but was German, and had to flee from Germany in 1933. And he distinguished, he had a Lehrstuhl at Frankfurt. And he wrote a book criticizing the Nazis. And so he came to the United States, and he said, "Wow!" And he had what we would call in ordinary language a pantheistic view. I think the better word is panentheism. God in all in God, like the thing in Acts 17. when Paul was on the Mars Hill, the Areopagus, and he quotes a Greek poet named Epimenides, who speaks of God as that in which we live and move and have our being. So that's the way Tillich thought about God. He said, God, the way I put it, is God is not the biggest fish in the sea. God is the water.
That's good.
So Tillich says, well, I mean, can you pray to this? And he called it the ground of being, Seinsgrund. And he says, well, can you pray to the Seinsgrund, to the ground of being? And he said, well, yes, because you must. That's the way we think. It's the way, this is an irresistible and important way to make contact with something. He said, but then the ground of being is not a person. It's a it's an it, right? And so he said, well, not quite an it. It's not he, it's not she, and it's not it either. So what is it? And he said, well, he says it is the ground of persons. So he thought in terms, actually, this is really the way physicists think right now. And it would get you out of that first cause way of thinking, by the way. Physicists think in terms of fields, electromagnetic fields, and the activation of those fields. Okay. And so what exists is an actualization of a potential field. It actually sounds like Aristotle. And so he says, a person is an emergent property of the ground of being. So the ground of being is not impersonal, but pre-personal. It's the ground of persons. So you and I are not conscious beings speaking about the world. We are the conscious part of the world. With the world, and this is good German idealism, by the way, this is good Hegel and Schelling. We are the world sort of poking his head out of the dirt and looking, or the water, and looking around and recognizing himself, seeing himself. When we become conscious of evolution, consciousness is the latest stage of evolution. That's evolution becoming conscious of itself. Right? And so person, consciousness, self, are emergent properties of the fundamental ground of it. And it may be, the physicists say, that this is happening all over the universe, but that so far away we'll never make contact with it. And some physicists say we better not, because if we do, it won't be because we made contact with it, but that it made contact with us, which means it is supremely intelligent compared to us. And we would be like bugs, for it. That's too long.
I would like to add a personal question in this context. We enjoyed very much to read your article, Do Radical Theologians Pray? It was very interesting, and there was something new in it. We had an evening of with explanations and discussions also in our parish about how can you pray in this new way. And so I would like to ask you about your spirituality as a radical theologian, and what is really important to you personally, and what is the support or something that keeps you up in life?
Prayer. I pray like mad. As you two know, I started out my life very devout Catholic, and I spent 4 years in the religious life in the De La Salle brothers, De La Salle Christian brothers. There are Irish Christian brothers, but we don't associate with them because they're involved in a lot of child abuse. The De La Salle brothers were a French order, and thank God there are no scandals in that order. So I spent 4 years there, and it was there that I sort of learned everything that I was going to do in life. And we parted ways because there was this thing that they called the vow of obedience, and that caused a little bit of trouble between us. And because I said to them at the end of this 4 years, I know what I want to do now. I want to teach philosophy in the Brothers College. I don't want to teach high school in the Brothers High Schools. And they said, well, that's not your call. We will tell you what you're going to do. You're not going to tell. So I said, okay, well. So then I left. But one of the things I took away from that was the spirit of prayer. And it was, we had long hours there where we were free. We could meditate, we could walk around the beautiful grounds we lived on. And I developed a kind of meditative mentality or spirituality, which has never left me. It was a permanent endowment of that time. And right now, the closest thing to my actual set, we used to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and get down to the chapel and meditate. And then we would have Mass. And to this day, I wake up like that. The first sound of the bell, they would ring this big bell, I would jump. And to this day, I wake up and I have my coffee, and I like to walk around out there. Or we have a place down, my son has a place down on the ocean. The ocean is the ground of being for me. For some people, it's the mountains, and for me, it's the ocean. That's the ground of being out there. And at nighttime, all you can hear is the water. And if you're really lucky, it's clear night. And once I remember it was a full moon, and the moon was there. It just came right across the water, the light of the moon right up to me. And I think moments like that. So I think prayer is not petitionary. I don't make fun of petitionary prayer. Sometimes I make fun of petitionary prayer because people pray for a football game, But petitionary prayer is also serious. But for me, the most important kind of prayer is meditative prayer, in which you have what Heidegger called Offenheit, openness to the mystery. So you get out of this thing where the world's there and I'm here and I'm a conscious subject and it's an object, and I realize I am a piece of that world. And in moments like that, where you just open yourself to the sheer Dasein of things, openness, we call it openness to the mystery, the kindness. That, I think, is a powerful form of prayer. And I think if you don't have that kind of something like that in your life, you're missing something. Your life is sort of passing by. But that's of the essence of. I mean, you can't talk about God seriously. You're just kidding yourself if you don't have some account of prayer.
Thank you for this answer.
Where there is God, there is prayer. Where there is prayer, there is God. If God is an object in an academic study or the first cause of the universe, you're just talking about something else.
There's a summary in of your book in the internet. There is said that it is mainly about morality and in the end not about religion or faith, and at least your book states the end of Christianity is simply a secular religion. Some regret or criticize this, others speak of a natural and timely development. Is morality and the dedicated commitment to a better world out of inner insight or called by the divine an appropriate summary of your book?
No, it's too narrow. I mean, I don't think of what I'm doing as... I am not... Kant did this. He reduced religion to morality. Mm-hmm. And then he said the rest is superstition. And I don't do anything like that. I think ethics and morality is profoundly important. and it is part of a religious understanding of the world, but it's by no means exclusive. I mean, what we were just talking about a moment ago was non-ethics, talking about meditative openness to the mystery of being. That's what I think religion really is. Now, that involves treating one another well, not because you're going to go to hell if you don't, but because it's the mystery, it belongs to the mystery of being. So no, it's certainly not just ethics. It includes the whole realm of human experience. In fact, I even wrote a book, as I just showed you a couple of hours ago, called Against Ethics, right? Meaning ethicism, moralist. Kant, against Kant, it could have been called. Secular religion, that's okay. I would be okay with that expression if you understand secularity well. If secularity, or what the French call laïcité, well, Yves Congar, you remember years ago, wrote a book on laïcité, and he said, laïcité means we are not going to allow the world to be swallowed up by God. Religion tends to mean the world gets swallowed by God, and everything is, God's in charge of everything, and God sees everything, and God's coming to get you if you misbehave, and God's going to reward you if you do. And the world is just a veil of tears, and it will pass, and we will live with it. And so he says, laïcité, it means the robustness of the world. And my views are one way to describe my views is what I call panentheism. God in all in God. So I would just add to that that if you understand the secular order, which basically means the order of time, sacrum, as filled with God, in not in the sense of any supernaturalist sense, but in the sense of God is that in which we live and move and have our being, then this sense of a deep ground in things, however you call it, as someone once said to me, it doesn't care what you call it, but if we call it the ground being, then the secular order is the order in which God's being is being realized. So it would be okay if you said a secular religion, but it would not mean what that ordinarily means, which is some kind of secular humanism, which dismisses religious discourse. I'm not interested in dismissing it. I'm interested in deconstructing it, which means reopening it.
Okay, I would like, at the end of our interview, to talk about the event, which is a very important word in your book. Because over the question, are we open for the event, or are we about to cement the stronghold of religion to prevent the event, as you called it? Practical example we told you about, in our parish, we would like to use one of our churches, not only for church service, but also for art, culture, social projects, and so on. And we are about to remove the benches where people sit. And we experience fierce disputes and resistance. And the interesting thing is, event exists also in German as an English word. They say event, and this is like a bad word. They say you only want events. And I would like to ask you what you think about this. What is your advice? What should we tell them?
Well, you're absolutely right about remaining open to the event, because otherwise you'll be continually reproducing the past instead of allowing it to move. And if we were never open to the event, then there would never have been any such thing as Christianity, because it had to make a break with classical traditional Judaism. And the event is how things happen. Things happen by the event. And of course, events are risky because when you open yourself to something unforeseeable, something different, It could be a disaster. Yeah, Donald Trump was unforeseeable for us. I mean, he was an event, but it was a disaster. So events are risky, but without events, nothing happens. You keep producing events. We were talking about this last night. That the Catholic principle of tradition.
Mm-hmm.
When we use this word tradition, it sounds like you mean the past.
Mm-hmm.
Tradition doesn't mean the past. Tradition means the process of transmitting, Überliefern. It's passing things along. And if you stop passing things along, you prevent the event, you kill the tradition. So it is profoundly anti-Catholic if the Catholic principle is the principle not of scripture but of tradition. It's profoundly anti-Catholic to resist the movement of tradition. That's why I was saying that Hegel and Schelling thought Pentecost Sunday was the most important feast, because it was the Spirit is now among us, and we are responsible for moving, carrying out God's work, answering God's call, and that is always unforeseeable. In Vatican II tried to refocus the Church on the Populus Dei, away from the hierarchy. Because why? Because the Populus Dei is where the Spirit is. Ubi Spiritus, ibi Ecclesia. Mm. And if you want to have a church, then you must listen to the Spirit. And the Spirit is the people. The Spirit is speaking to us now. The Spirit is saying to us, no, you can't treat women like that. You can't, you must realize the diversity of human experience, the diversity of forms of love. The Spirit is speaking, and we're not listening. Too many people are not listening. But if they would listen to the Spirit, then the church would be church. It would be the place where the Spirit happens. And that, for me, is the event. It is something risky, but something new. And it doesn't abolish the past. It picks up something that's there in the past, but no one heard it. And now the past is coming to us from the future.
That's good. The past is coming just from the future. And one last question. We have a young colleague who asked that. She has a lot of power, and she says everything is too slow, and she wants innovation. She's really tough also. And she said in Germany and in the United States, in Germany, the United States stand for innovation, founder spirit, Silicon Valley mentality, and all this is highly attractive to young people. And on the opposite, we read about the Catholic Church in the United States, and we see a quite shocking picture with very conservative tendencies. How does that fit together?
Well, it tells us we need a new account of the hierarchy and of a new account of the church that doesn't allow the hierarchy to be the church and to repress the Spirit. I think the church has inherited a form of government that was created by Diocletian. Mm-hmm. The diocese, Diocletian reorganized the Roman Empire in terms of the Pontifex Maximus, which was broken down into dioceses and reported back to him. That is a pagan form of organization. It was formulated by one of the great persecutors of Christianity, and it has now been identified with the church, the gathering, those who are called together, is what that word means, right? Those who are called together, has now taken the form, or not now, has for 1700 years or so, taken the form of the Roman Empire. Now, my view is that the Roman Empire is not what Jesus had in mind. It was what got him killed. And this, and it served a purpose in its day, actually, right? Because the barbarians were at the gates, and the church, when it turned itself into the empire, I don't think that Constantine converted to Christianity. I think Christianity converted to Constantine. And it actually served a purpose. It sort of held the West together in the face of the barbarians. And so, but there was some reason for it. But it was a completely contingent historical construction, which I would maintain has nothing or next to nothing to do with Jesus. I think it was the thing that he was against, and it's what got him killed. Jesus was a troublemaker, right? He was a deconstructor in the true sense of that word, in that he wanted to break up formulaic religion and return religion to the Father. And he was warning everyone that that the rule of the Father was coming, and we should not turn these temporary constructions of ours into eternal ones. Have them as if you have them not. And Jesus was a very revolutionary figure. If he weren't, he would have died in his bed at an old age. He was obviously saying something that was causing a great deal of trouble. And the trouble was with the high priests and the Roman Empire. And so he said, there's going to be a new rule, and that got him killed. So I think that the problem in the church is that the church has turned itself into an idol. The church should be an icon, not an idol. And I think it's turned itself into an idol. Among Protestants in the United States, conservative, they've done the same thing, not with the church, but with the Bible. So I think we need a revolutionary reorganization of the church, in which the church's leaders will be created by the people in some kind of democratic way. Demos, the rule of the people, is the rule of the Spirit. Populus Dei. And in which leaders would be a primum inter pares. So we need radical reorganization of the church. Is that going to happen? No. Not as this is the joke. This has probably heard this joke. Is that someone had a vision of God and was communicating with God, and he said, "God, will there ever be women priests?" And God says, "Not in my lifetime."
Okay.
So I mean, I feel that way about the Catholic hierarchy.
Okay.
Not in my lifetime. But no, I think church needs to go read the New Testament.
Okay. Well, let's hope he's wrong. Thank you so much for this interview. It was really very inspiring. I think we could talk about a lot of more things, but I think it gave a good view of your way of thinking. And thank you very much for everything.
Well, thank you for coming to visit me, and thank you for this wonderful Übersetzung you've done. And I encourage you to, as I said when we had a little toast last night, keep on. In English, you say, keep on keeping on. Don't let them get to you. Keep on keeping on.
Thank you.